Okay. Bienvenidos. Welcome, everybody. We have another technological complicated evening because we are sharing two projects here. One project is the Bet Midrash for Jewish Thought, and this session is also part of the program because we were talking about Messianism and also political theology. And we were dealing with Carl Schmitt and also Hannah Arendt, and we'll be able to see that this is an extension of the same discourse to a new direction. And also we are participating with another project called ZMAN EMET, Real Time, which is a kind of reaction group for study and discussion regarding the current events in Israel, Gaza, in the Jewish world. Group of that like a space of thinking and discussion, and also hopefully turned into kind of action and involvement. So this evening talk, this evening lecture is connecting the two projects because we have the pleasure to have with us Norma Musih. Norma is a cultural researcher and curator, now postdoctorate in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And within the touching point of cultural studies, anthropology, sociology, also art is involved. So Norma is exploring the concept of political imagination. And political imagination is something that become, I think, very crucial and acute subject to discuss. We are in a kind of crisis of imagination, and we are in a point of change, maybe from postmodernism to postmodernism. We don't know yet the new territories, but it's an opportunity to open a discussion for different points of views and to create the possibility to imagine different futures. And I think Norma is touching our discussion from a very interesting point. It's about political imagination, but also training for political imagination. We could be trained and improve our abilities in this field. And Norma is also, beside the academic background, also a political activist, and one of the founder of an organization, which is a very important organization in Israel called Zohrot, those who remember, which is dedicated to commemorating the Palestinian villages that was destroyed during the War of 48, what is called in Israel the War of Independence. And this dealing with this layer of memory, which is a kind of complicated heritage. It's very charged, and very interesting to look at this kind of cultural processes through this engagement with this memory. So thank you very much, Norma, for being with us, and good evening to all of our participants tonight. And the floor is yours, and we are really happy to have you here. And I think this is a very promising discussion, both the political imagination and also the difficult heritage. And this is something we would like very much to elaborate.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. I must say that I do speak Spanish, so afterwards, if I understand Spanish and I do speak Spanish, but I feel more comfortable now to speak in English, but know that we can do that also in the Q&A. I will share with you a presentation because I want to show a lot of images. I hope it works. Can you see it? Yeah. Okay, just let me see if I can do this. Okay. So these are dark times, marked by profound political challenges, both globally and most acutely here in Palestine, Israel, where I'm speaking from. Here, imagining a future beyond the current genocide in Gaza, the cycles of inherited colonial violence, war, and death seem increasingly impossible. Yet, in the face of this political deadlock, the need to imagine otherwise is more urgent than ever. In this presentation, I want to argue that our current political emergency reflects a deeper crisis, a crisis of the political imagination itself. Now, drawing on the work of Hannah Arendt, I will begin by examining the relationship between images and imagination, highlighting the interplay between them. And we will speak a little bit about the connection, right, between images and imagination. In imagination, we have already images. I will then conceptualize political imagination as a practice that, like culture, requires active cultivation and, more importantly, training. And training is key here because it's very different from the way we are used to think about imagination as something that happens only in the mind. And I want to argue that no, that imagination is something that we need to train. Finally, I will propose 3 practices for training this imagination through and with images, and argue that this training needs to be far grounded in a dialectical movement between past, present, and future, as a way of opening new possibilities for a political transformation. But first, what is imagination? In her lectures on Kant's political philosophy, Arendt speaks of imagination as, and I'm quoting, something beyond or between thought and sensibility. It belongs to thought, she says, insofar as it is outwardly invisible, and it belongs to sensibility insofar as it is something like an image. So it's both. It's something that we need the senses in order to deal with, but also we need the mind, right? It's a combination of these 2 different words. Imagination combines thinking and activity that, according to Arendt, belongs to the realm of the mind and is detached from the world, right? Arendt has this, I would say, kind of modernist way of thinking about doing and thinking. So she has, in one hand, she has the book that I hope that I'm sure you know, the Human Condition, in which she speaks about labor and work and action, which are connected to the world. And on the other hand, she speaks about the life of the mind, which is thinking and judgment and imagination. So for Arendt, imagination belongs in the realm of the mind and is detached from the world on one hand, but on the other hand, is something like an image, which is related to the senses and therefore related to the world of things. So imagination connects the 2 worlds, if you want, the world of the mind and the world of action. So for example, out of all, and she thinks about imagination as something like a synthesis. So for example, we can think about imagination as a synthesis, as an image that we create in our mind. So out of all the chairs we have seen in our life, we can picture an image of a chair that does not correspond to any specific chair, yet it holds all the qualities of all the chairs we have seen, right? We have an image of a chair in our mind, which is not a specific chair, but a synthesis of all the chairs that we have seen. Or we can create an image in our mind that combines 2 things that we already know, but are not in reality, as a minotaur, right? It's a combination of a man and a bull. So the way imagination produces synthesis is, according to Arendt, by providing an image for a concept. And we can speak more about it afterwards. So imagination, as the etymology of the word suggests, and as Arendt understands, is, as I said before, intimately related to images. Now, let's for a moment think about images. What are images? And how we use the word image. And I think it's important to pay attention to this because we use it to describe very different things. And I'm here speaking with W.J.T. Mitchell from What is an Image? So think, for example, we use image to speak about pictures, right? About statues, about designs. But we also use the word image to speak about mirrors, about projections, about appearances, about dreams, right? Memories. I have an image of my grandmother's house in my head, right? It's an image. It's not sure that it's the way it was, but I have an image of it. But also I have an image in my dream, right? An idea can be an image, but also we have verbal images. For example, a metaphor is an image. A description creates an image in our mind. A story can create an image in our mind, right? So images are very complicated, and we use the word in very different ways, but we use the same word. And it's interesting to think about it, how we use the word and how it works in the language. And I think it's the same in English, in Spanish, in Hebrew. We have dimuy, we have imagen, we have image, right? So images are important to understand imagination. We need to understand how images work in order to understand how imagination works. But they are also important for politics. Images create a link between politics and imagination because much of how we experience politics today happens through images. And I'm not only speaking about the images that we see in our cell phones or in television, but when we engage in politics, we create images of places, of futures that we can share with others, right? I have an image for a future in which Palestinians and Israelis will live together in peace, for example. So I have this image in my mind, and it's an image, it's not part of the reality, but when we have common images, we can start working together, right? We have something in common, we share something. So images have power. They can illustrate the past, represent the present, and envision a future. Yet the images, we have to remember, are slippery creatures and very ambiguous also. Their meaning constantly changing, right? According to how, when, and where they appear. And of course, how they are framed by the archive, by the state, by the television, but by an history book, or even in a museum. So, for example, let's take this image by Nahum Gutman. Nahum Gutman is one of Israel's most known artists. He's considered to be the artist of Tel Aviv, who pioneered what is considered to be an Israeli unique style, and he even has his own museum in Tel Aviv. So he's a very well-known figure in Tel Aviv, and this is a very famous drawing that from the 1930s. Here we can see Little Tel Aviv in the middle. Do you see it? Do you see my
yes
mouse?
Yes, we can.
So this is Little Tel Aviv in the middle, and here we see Jaffa right in the left. Tel Aviv is seen growing out of the sand, while the dense neighborhood of Manshie, which we can see in this photograph from the same period and is stretched between Jaffa and Tel Aviv, disappears completely from the drawing. So here you can see in the photograph the minaret of the mosque, and you can see here also the minaret of the mosque. So Gutman was looking, this was the angle that he was looking at, but for some reason, he erased it completely Manshie. Well, Manshie was there, right? When he was drawing, the neighborhood of Manshie was there, and it was very dense, and it connected Jaffa and Tel Aviv, actually. Now, when we position these two images next to this photograph, in which we can see the ruins of Manshie from the late 1940s, it is possible to go back and look at Gutman's painting and see in it not only an innocent painting with a smiling sun, but a future testimony of destruction and violent erasure of the neighborhood. So we can see that in a sense, Nahum Gutman imagined the destruction of Manshia before it was destruction. I'm not saying here that he planned the destruction of Manshia, that he even wished for, but we see the picture and we cannot not see it now, right? So because of their intricate nature, because they are both material and immaterial, as you remember, we said before that images can be photographs or paintings, but also memories and stories and dreams, because they consolidate publics and transcend divisions, because they allow us to see beyond the here and the now, while at times preventing us from seeing what is in front of the eyes, as in the case of Nahum Gutman. Images are the substance that imagination is made of. Now, for Arendt, and I quote, the force of the imagination makes the others present, and thus moves in a space that is potentially public, open to all sides. In other words, it adopts the position of Kant's word citizen. To think with an enlarged mentality means that one trains one's imagination to go visiting. Okay? Training is the action that generates and brings about the imagination. It is the action that allows the imagination to enlarge our mentality. Training is needed because the imagination is not a given, right? If it was a given, we wouldn't need training, or something that just appears out of thin air. Imagination is not something we are born with, but instead requires training, much like running, biking, or maintaining an ongoing deliberation between one and oneself, and between us and our communities. So many times I think about imagination as biking. So I can study biking from watching videos. I can learn a lot about biking by reading books, by seeing pictures, but I will never know how to bike before I bike, right? So it's something that we have to do in order to understand, in order to learn how to do it. So I think the same as imagination, okay? This emphasis on training is central, I believe, for our understanding of imagination as an action that is not exclusive domain of a mastermind. And here I want to say that it's very, very important to remember that dictators have a very developed political imagination. Now, they have a very developed imagination. It's not political in the sense that we are speaking here about political. And I'm speaking here about political with Arendt as the way we share the world together. So dictators have very developed imagination, but it's not political because it's just their imagination. When we speak about political imagination, the way Arendt imagines political, we are speaking about the way we share the world together. So conceptualizing imagination as a trainable skill serves a dual purpose. It democratizes the capacity for political thinking while fostering a more nuanced approach to envisioning political futures. Unlike grand ideologies that offer blueprints for imaginary futures, viewing imagination as a practice acknowledges the need for ongoing critical re-evaluation of past convictions. It also encourages continuous learning that remains responsive to changing circumstances and diverse perspectives, ultimately keeping political imagination dynamic, humble, and grounded. And I think also that political imagination needs to be grounded in a specific place. So importing political imaginations from other places is something that we learn from colonial practices and imperial practices, and it's not how political imagination should work. Political imagination in the framework that I am trying to develop here needs to be grounded in the specificity of a place and the people that are going to live through this political imagination. So if I imagine how people in Barcelona will live without paying any prices for this imagination. It's not political imagination, right? It's an imagination that is closer to an imperial imagination or to colonial imagination. So people in the United States cannot imagine and dictate how we will live here in Palestine and Israel, because, right, here are the people that need to imagine their own future. So the grounding in the place, in the past, in the traditions, in the languages of a specific place is very important for political imagination, the way I understand it. So Arendt urges us to train the imagination, but doesn't say how. So what I want to do today is to suggest 3 practices for training the imagination with and through images. Unlearning the past, adopting an activist approach to the present, and envisioning alternatives for the future. So what do I mean by unlearning? Unlearning means to learn a different history than the history one grew up with, and to learn a new history one already knows, by asking questions about what we know, what we do not know, and about the mechanisms that create maintain, and generate this knowledge. In her book, Potential History: Unlearning Imperialism, Ariela Aisha Azulay suggests unlearning as a mechanism of refusal, a mechanism to resist and oppose the violence of imperialism, by searching, claiming, and restoring what was robbed, looted, and ruined. Unlearning the past does not mean to forget or erase the past, but to rethink it through critical eyes, questioning the evidence of the undeniable, and exercising judgment towards the obvious, towards the way things are, right? For Israelis as myself, unlearning the past means understanding the history of the place, not through the framework of a national movement, the Zionist national movement, but through the perspective of the Nakba. Nakba means in Arabic great calamity or disaster, and it refers to the destruction of more than 500 localities and the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians who became refugees during what Ilan Pappé has termed the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948, and now we should say the first ethnic cleansing in Palestine. There are different strategies for unlearning this history. So reading a book is one strategy, but there are others. And I want to present different strategies today for unlearning in the past. Digital cartography, for example, offers one way of doing that. So iReturn is an app, like you can download it in your phones. It's a digital navigation app that allows users to visit places that are not marked on Israeli official maps and are not marked in the space, right? So localities of Palestinian villages that were destroyed during 48 or after 48, and they are not part of the place, but through this app you can learn about them, and more importantly, you can get there. So these places were depopulated and sometimes completely destroyed after 48. Like other digital maps, iNakba uses layers of language, of knowledge, and of spatial history. The use of layers allows us to practice unlearning the past without erasing the present, right? Because on the map, on the app, we see both. We see the present and we see the past. That is to see both the presence and the destruction of the Palestinian space as part of the Israeli space, but also to practice imagining ahead and asking what layers can we add to the place. So taking the methodology of the digital cartography, thinking about layers, try to think about them in the space. What would it mean to have a layered space? We don't have one in here, but we can hope for. So another strategy for unlearning the past is looking for stories of people that are not part of the hegemonic history or that were completely erased from the history. So, for example, Asher Tzvi Hirsch Ginsberg, the founder of cultural Zionism, is a very well-known figure in Zionist history, very well known mostly by his nickname Echad Ha'am. He was a key figure in the Zionist movement, but he opposed Herzl's position on the Zionist movement. In 1891, following a visit to Palestine, he wrote a detailed report stating that the place was actually inhabited and that cultivated lands and settlements could be seen all along its entire length. So the place was not empty, right? An empty land for the story of an empty land. In 1891, Hannah already says, no, the land is not empty. Hannah was also one of the ideological fathers of Brit Shalom, a very important movement that was also kind of erased from history, and Hannah Arendt was also part of this movement at some point. A group of Jewish intellectuals founded in Palestine in 1925 that were advocating already for a binational state in which equal rights for Jews and Arabs. So the idea of a binational state was born together with the idea of the Zionist state, if you wish. Another very interesting figure that I didn't know about and just find out by mistake, but she's fascinating, is Simchat Tzabari. She was born at the end of 1913 in Neve Tzedek, which is a neighborhood that was actually next to Manshia, was very connected to the neighborhood of Manshia, which we saw the photographs before. She grew up in a very religious home. Her parents came to Israel from Yemen, and she attended an elementary school for girls, but at some very early point, she joined the Communist Party. At the end of the 8th grade, she went underground due to her communist activities. Part of them were bombing, putting bombs in the mandatory offices. In 1930, at the age of 17, she was sent for an academic studies at the Communist University of Eastern Workers. And in 1933, she returned to Israel and became a dominant figure in the party. At the age of 21, she became the first woman on the Central Committee of the Communist Party and led it along with her partner, Radwan El-Hilu. Her partner was Palestinian. They were living as a mixed couple in the 1930s in Jaffa. And I want to say they were not the only one. From the moment I found about her history, I started looking for other histories, because from the segregated reality in which we live today, it's impossible to imagine that this other reality in which there were mixed couples living in Jaffa and in Tel Aviv and leading together the Communist Party. It was really a revelation for me. And her history it's one of these histories that are not part of the Zionist story, but are very important because they show us they show us a kind of a junction in which things could have developed differently. They show us that there were other options, other ideas, other people that thought differently all along from the beginning. So unlearning the past is crucial for training a political imagination, because the ways in which we understand the past project itself in how we experience the present and envision the future. Dismantling the uniformity of the past and rethinking its chronological, linear narrative is useful for questioning the historiography of the past, put ourselves in the shoes of different historical subjects, and ask what other alternatives were open in different historical moments. Where are the roads now taken? Now, thinking about political imagination, not only as a mental activity that takes place in the mind of an individual, but as an activity generated with others, suggests the process of imagining is a process that does not take place before an action, but is part of it. It is a process actually developed through actions. And this is also important because when we think about imagination, we think, okay, I will imagine the future of Israel-Palestine. I have an image in my mind, and then I will work to make it true. But sometimes imagination is something that develops through actions. As I start to work towards this image, this image changes in my mind. It doesn't stay the same. And I think that activism teaches a lot about how we change in changing circumstances, and also how to imagine with others. So there is another aspect also in which activism helps us to train a political imagination, it is in the understanding that activism requires presence. Activism reminds us that political imagination is an action that takes place in the present, yes, in this very moment, since the past is no longer here and the future not yet. This is a practice that trains us to enlarge the present, right? Arendt speaks about enlarging our mentality. I want to add to it that we have to enlarge the present moment. And in this sense, it rescues us from the burden of the past and the anxiety of the future. In what follows, I want to share with you a few images of activist interventions that take very, very different forms. And I want to also to ask you to pay attention to the images that are created through these interventions. So, Bridging Memories was an activist intervention in which body-size photographs of Palestinian refugees living today in a refugee camp in South Lebanon, where, yeah, it was in 2008, the project, were posted by Israeli activists in the place from which they were expelled and photographed again. So can you see it's a photograph inside a photograph? So here we have the photograph, for example, of Ahmad Salim al-Khatib, which is posted in Ras El Ahmar, which is today Kerem Ben Simbra. It's the place from which he was expelled in 48. Actually, this image is very interesting and also very moving because Ahmad Salim al-Khatib died after the first photograph was taken and before the second photograph was taken. And one of his last wishes was to be buried in the cemetery of his village, which of course he could not. But in this image, the activists, they carried his image to the cemetery of the village, to the ruins of the cemetery, and then photographed again, in a sense, trying to fulfill his last wish. So these are photographs within other photographs that convey an attempt to challenge the Zionist national imaginary, anticipating the return of the Palestinian refugees to their homes, thus creating the imagery of a historical moment of justice and reconciliation. The refugees in the photographs are no longer refugees because they have never left their homes or already returned to them. And the Israeli Jews are no longer perpetrators because they have taken responsibility for the historical wrong. This is a reality that exists only in the photograph. But now it's an image we can talk about, right? We have an image of return and we can start discussing it. Now I want to share also images from protests that took place in the city of Sachin and in Jaffa. And these are protests against what is going now in Gaza, against the genocide. And these photographs are also speaking about the starvation of children. And see, also observing this, also in this photograph, we have a photograph inside the photograph, right? We have two photographs actually in here. And these are protests of Palestinians and Israelis together. Also here, in these photographs, activists are also some artists marching towards the fence, towards the Gaza fence to protest against the genocide and in solidarity with the Sumud flotilla that was arriving to the shore of Gaza. Those are photographs by Oren Ziv, who is creating the activist archive, I think. These are photographs. Another way of activism is what is called activists that are joining Palestinians during the harvest of the olive trees, trying to protect them against the settler violence, which is escalating in the last months to terrible amounts of violence, incredibly. And sometimes the way to act is to refuse. These are young people who are refusing now to enlist to the Israeli army and were sent to jail, actually already, for refusing the mandatory conscription. So we saw before Ido Ilam and Saul Bechar, and here it's I forgot her name. Ela Keidar, of course. And here we have, I wanted to show you the protest that is, they are not alone. So they have a community that is supporting them, but they are doing a very brave thing now. Their activism is actually refusing to become part. So activism foregrounds political imagination in the present, in the public sphere with others, as part of a collective. It is a practice that creates new knowledge, that connects political imagination to habits and skills, translating abstract ideas into practical actions. And also I should say that it's activism reminds us that political imagination is something that can be dangerous, right? The activists that are refusing, they are going to the jail. The activists that are in the West Bank are also enduring the violence of the settlers and the violence of the army. So political imagination can be also something dangerous. Activism requires to take into consideration differences and changing circumstances, and therefore it requires flexibility and compromises. Now, the last practice I want to suggest for training a political imagination is based on envisioning different futures. This practice relies on the power of speculative culture to turn what seems an impossible scenario into an object that can be discussed, because in speculative culture, the future is a place that already exists. This practice is based on the power of art to make the strange known and the known strange. To illustrate this point, I want to share with you two works of art that envision different futures. And these are works by two artists that I really love their work, and I could spend a lot of time speaking about them, but it will be short today. We can speak more about them in the Q&A. So the first work is by Palestinian artist Larissa Sansour. In her work, Sansour asks thought-provoking questions about local and global vulnerabilities, offering creative strategies of resistance. The work I want to share today is called In Vitro. It was showed in 2019 in the Biennale in Venice. And it's a film, but it's also an installation. This work is situated at the edge of a climate catastrophe, large-scale destruction, and the threat of humanity's erasure. Using science fiction tropes, the film moves between scenes of the past, fading memories of the last days before the apocalypse, featuring the city of Bethlehem, and I must say that Larissa Sansour herself comes from Bethlehem, and the present that takes place in a concrete bunker, where a scientist has created an underground orchard using heirlooms native seeds collected in the final days before the apocalypse. So we have, most of the film is a dialogue between a scientist, an old scientist, and which we imagine to be a younger scientist that is supposed to take up her role in cultivating this orchard in the bunker. But not only seeds of plants are growing in the orchard, in the bunker they are growing also children, clones actually of children lost to the disaster that are engineered to embody memories that do not belong to them. So here we see the young scientist that we see afterwards in the film, and we understand that she's the daughter of the older scientist that was killed in the apocalypse. And here we have her clone. And her clone, as a clone, she has the memories of the daughter that is already dead, because she was born in the bunker. So she doesn't have the memories of the city of Bethlehem as a living memories, but they are her memories also. So in this film, she's questioning a lot, what does it mean to remember and how we remember. So the second work I want to discuss is by Israeli artist Yael Bartana. Yael Bartana was born in Israel and has spent 3 decades building an art practice that excavates and inverts national mythologies. In her work, she appropriates Zionist visual rhetorics, subjects its iconography to radical reversals to ask, how can we read Zionist images against their grain? So I want to speak today about her work, Light to the Nations, or Lagoim, which she showed in the last Venice Biennale, representing Germany. So the name Light to the Nation is taken from the Bible and points towards the possibilities of redemption in the Jewish context, indicating here a more universal message. At the heart of the work is a generation ship, designated based on the spheres of the Kabbalah. So the design of the ship is like the tree of the Kabbalah that will lead humanity towards other planets. And in doing so, it exercises the Kabbalist concept of tikkun olam, which is repair of the world. The ship, already carrying the first generation of travelers, have you seen? Okay, these are images from inside the ship, stages a speculative exodus from planet Earth in response to a climate catastrophe, again, like the work of Sansur, that has made life on Earth unlivable. Yet the vessel carries no coordinates. It may seek habitable worlds, orbit while Earth recovers, or drift perpetually. This indeterminacy is not a narrative weakness. This is a theoretical precision. It represents actually provocation, a call to think. So the ship, not like the ships that we know from science fiction that aims to arrive to another planet, to conquer another planet, to conquer Mars, to look for other things. No, this ship, we don't know where is it going. Maybe it's not going anywhere, right? It's the diasporic thing that it's keeping alive in this ship. Okay. Both works begin with a disaster that leaves Jews and Palestinians without a place on earth. In both works, alternative worlds are built underground or inside the ship, which allow us to begin to imagine what is needed and what is missing in the world. Now, in the same way that works of art can investigate colors and forms that do not exist, speculative culture can investigate political perceptions and social constellations and our emotional reactions to them. In other words, we can think about speculative culture as a methodology for investigating political imagination. Works of art allow us to practice seeing the future in the plural as a wide range of possibilities that are not a continuation of the present. But also it's important to remember that works of art are not political plans. It's not like Censure sends us to underground or Bartana sends us to outer space as a solution, but are provocations for thinking. And they are taking us to, very different places in order to open up possibilities for thinking otherwise. And this is what is important to remember. Works of art are not political plans. To conclude, I want to go back to the image that we started with of the destroyed neighborhood of Manshie and read a few lines from a story that imagines the place after the return of the Palestinian refugees and describes the everyday life in a hipster neighborhood populated by both Jews and Arabs in a post-national future. The name of the story and the name of the neighborhood in which it takes place is Manshie Stede, the new Manshie, reconstructed on a floating island on the seashore between Jaffa and Tel Aviv. In Manshie Stede, and this is a story by Tomer Gardi, new Palestinian returnees, native Palestinians and Jews live together. Quite a few jokes circulated in the neighborhood about itself. The Jews said, smiling, "This is not what we had in mind when we said that the Arabs would throw us into the sea." The Palestinians, on the other hand, were resented. For this did we return to Palestine, to live in a neighborhood on an island opposite to Jaffa? But the distance to Jaffa and Tel Aviv was very short. A bridge connected us to the mainland, and the view was amazing. On one hand, the sea, and on the other hand, its bride, the Bride of the Sea, which is the name of Fort Jaffa in the literature. So train the imagination to go visiting in Palestine, Israel, is a multi-layered, ongoing process of world making that must be committed to the specificity of the place, its history, cultures, and ecosystems. It entails unlearning the past, acknowledging its wrongs through activism in the present, and envisioning different futures, and hopefully better futures, better alternatives for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Norma. Very interesting, very much, well, of course, rooted and growing from the Israeli-Palestinian situation. But actually, you are presenting a kind of method. And I'm also curious between me and myself how this method could work in other sites with other topics. And I find it really fascinating. I think it's the time we'll open it to questions and comments. So if you have an idea, I'll turn on the lights. Yeah, please. I'll just turn you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Norma, for your conference. It has been very interesting for me. I have a question in order to understand how you develop these activities in Israel, because I think that this kind of activities is mandatory or almost mandatory that both people, Arabs, Palestinian, and Jewish people, take the activities together. I suppose that this is how you develop this activity, but my question is, if in the situation, in the current situation, is it feasible? Is it possible to do it? It is something important from the numeric point of view, no? Because maybe a little activity with few people, but I understand that it's important that many people take these activities together. This is something easy in the current situation in Israel.
No, yes, thank you for the question. No, of course, no. Of course, it's very difficult. We are living in a very violent time, dark times, segregated times. But I do want to show that training a political imagination as part of a group, as part of a culture, not everybody has to do the things at the same time. So, for example, when Zeb presented in his presentation, he said that Sochrot is a very important group. So, and I was smiling because I am glad to hear that, but it's not considered a very big group. It never was a very big group. It's not something that people will, acknowledge. But the word Nakba, for example, was not used in Hebrew until Sochrot started to using it. So Sochrot is a very small group, it's not the mainstream, not at all, right? But the word Nakba people didn't know what was the word Nakba, right? In Arabic when using it in Hebrew. And today the word Nakba is already part of the Hebrew language. Of course, people when speaking about Gaza, they say we will do it another Nakba. So they're not always using the word as I would like to use it, but at least the word is part of the language, and it was the action of a very, very small group, right? So I think that if we think about culture, the way that we can change the culture by changing the language, by adding different images to the common imaginary that we have, it changes something. It's not something that changes immediately, but at least there is a seed that we can go back to, as we can go back now to the ideas of Rit Shalom, which was a group that was speaking about a binational state before the state was created, right? So I think that, yes, the current political reality, you are right, it's very dark, but maybe it's my way of finding some light in the darkness.
I think it's important not because of the size, but because it expresses an idea, and it's in a way it's like endangered species, which is important because it exists.
Thank you.
Questions, comments?
Yes. There is thank you very much for the presentation, Norma. My question would be around, as long as you are in contact with different artists that explore different languages and experiences and transforming them into pieces of art or communication, as long as art becomes public, becomes something that can be visible or made visible, what can tell you us about the sources of, let's say, inspiration or investigation, artists who aspire to be connected from different communities or, as you say, from a multi-layered experience. How would you describe this shared community of, let's say, inspiration? Does the question make sense to you?
I'm trying to understand. So you are asking about the inspiration of the different artists. They don't know, they don't work together. I combine them. They help me to think, but they don't think together. They are two different. Actually, I have this idea that
in other words, as long as the final result is action, and action demands public space, which can be shared, right? So maybe you have replied the activity is to connect all those experiences, right?
Yeah, I think that if we think about the artists, the idea is to provoke experiences also, not just to share with us experiences, because these are things that never happen. There is no ship and no bunker. but not spaceship that it's called Light to the Nations, but it's a provocation. It helps us to think. And specifically the work both of Sansura and Bartana, they are very much connected to the past. So they use the past in order to envision the future. They go back. So Bartana deals with Zionism iconography, and Sansur goes back to her past, to Palestinian past, and thinks through it. So I think that for me, they are both really interesting artists that are doing kind of science fiction, right? Thinking about the future, but they have to go back to the past. Like both of them are going back to the past in order to do their work. So I think it's very interesting for us also to learn how we imagine. Like we have to go back to the past in order to imagine the future. This is the kind of dialectical movement that I'm trying to speak about here.
Thank you. It's interesting because Yael Bartana, this project is very science fictional, but she has like political fiction projects. Like if now she is representing Germany, I remember she represented Poland, and the project was building settlements in Poland. Zionist movement is going to reconquer Poland with settlements. So it's fascinating, this game, and it's exactly what you're talking about. You take the past and you mold it into a new, sometimes paradoxical possibilities.
Actually, the work of this work was part of a trilogy, the work that you are speaking about, Zev, in which the first part was a Polish leader is calling to the Jews to come back to Poland. He's calling back the Jews he's saying to the Jews, come back, we need you. You were part of us. And now we need you. Without you, we are not the same. So it's a kind of, it's interesting because it's reversing Zionism in a sense. This is the word that Yael uses, Bartana uses. Yeah.
Mijael, perdón, Mijael Gadish creo que quería intervenir. Mijael.
Okay. Mijael, bienvenido.
No te escuchamos, Mijael.
Perdón, ahora sí.
Oh.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Era muy fascinante. Both examples that you gave were, I could feel some irony or, and I was asking myself if you know any examples where are not so ironic in the sense that these examples are imagined futures that could encounter rejection in many viewers, which it usually happens. But do you think is there any possibility where you can imagine a future as an artist? I mean, even science fiction, but that could somehow bridge a possibility to encounter less opposition or less ironic. Have you seen any example? Or?
Yes, actually, I have seen. So there are a few artists and architects that were planning their villages. There is an architect that's called Hannah Arendt. I curated an exhibition of his work. He's originally from Kufar Birem, which was destroyed. Actually, it was not completely destroyed, but is today it's a national park. So people were evacuated and expelled from the village, and most of the village was destroyed. Part of the village in which there is still a church functions like it's part of the park, but people still come to the church. And he reconstructed the old village of Kufar Birem to become a modern place, like a place that people can live today, not like a village he did a project in which he reconstructed the village not as it was in 48, but imagine the village as a place that people could live today, people who are not agricultural workers anymore, who work in high-tech, who have two cars, who need Wi-Fi. So he kind of reimagined the village using what is left from the village, and incorporating it as part of a new village that can be, that can be seen today. But so there are a few projects like that of people rebuilding or reimagining villages. There is an artist from Gaza, actually, who imagined a metro in Gaza, right? Which is something that we can not imagine with all this. But imagine there is a metro in Gaza, right? Just like a metro in Barcelona or in London, a regular metro in a regular place. So it's not so much the thing, but think about it as a regular place for a moment, like not as a victim or as a, so this
is a child concept, because the metro is the coined as an expression describing the tunnels of Hamas underneath Gaza. So it's like also play.
Yes, but imagine just a regular metro, like in London. That's the. So yes, so there are projects, but I think that all these projects, what they have in common is that they are not easy to digest. And if they are easy to digest, they are not good art sometimes, because art needs to do something to move us somehow. If it's too nice, maybe it's not so good. But they help us to think, right? They do help us to think.
Hello.
Creo que de él, no sé tu nombre, perdona. Hay una persona, una señora con gafas que creo que levantó la mano antes.
Pero,
¿No? No.
Pero mientras tenemos una pregunta aquí en la clase.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would like to ask, how do you understand the concept of political, and what does it mean for you, and what makes an imagination political? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. If we had more time, I would start by unpacking the word political imagination, because actually it's not one, but it's two words, right? It's political and imagination, as you just pointed out. And when we speak about political, so political is also it's a layered concept. So we have one way of thinking about political as the relationship with the government, the relationship between us and the state, right? Between us and the government. Like following Carl Schmitt, I would say we can think about the relationship between the people and the state, or the people and the government. Or we can think political with Arendt and Heidegger as the way that we share the space together, as the way that we negotiate how we want to share the world. So these are two different ways of thinking about political. As you can guess, I am with Arendt and Heidegger in thinking about political, not as the relationship between the people and the state, but the way the people relate to each other. But we have to remember that this other version, this other way of thinking about politics is very much part of the reality in which we live in. And imagination, I think it's important, because when we think about politics as something that we do together and we share, we have to have a shared image of what we are working for, or how we want to see our world together. Now, imagination, as I said before, is something that it's an ongoing process. It's not something that we do one time and then we stop doing, and then we have this blueprint. This is how the state should look like, and no, imagination is something that we have all the time to do together. It's a negotiation all the time. So I think in this way, I see the connection that if it's something that we have to continue doing all the time, and if we think about politics as the way that we share together the common world, we have to all the time engage in this negotiation. It's not enough that we have that we know how the state should look like, and then we have it written and that's it. We have all the time to continue engaging because the circumstances changes, everything changes, right? The acclaim change. We need all the time to continue this negotiation and to find new ways of sharing the world together. Did I answer your question?
Because in Carl Schmitt politics, it's identify your enemy. You need to know your enemy. And Hannah Arendt politics is the completely contra approach. You know?
Yep.
Lady with glasses. Margot, you mentioned someone who wants to ask a question. So. Comments, questions?
In la chat.
Chat.
Sí, pues.
Margot, ¿puedes leerlas del chat?
Sí. ¿La leo? ¿La leo?
Sí.
Léela tú, porque tú la has hecho. Sí.
Okay, was Hannah in favor of a national Palestinian Jewish state? Yes, he was. He was at certain point, he was part of Brit Shalom, and he was part of this group that was thinking about a binational state.
Brit Shalom, it's also Huber, it's a very important group. And Hannah, an interesting point of view that he was saying that the state of Israel is not to resolve the issue, the questions of Jews, because the question of Jews will be resolved in New York and Buenos Aires. The state of Israel needs to resolve the issue of Judaism, to be a cultural center, should be a cultural hub. No? This was his approach.
Yeah, which is something that we, of course, also forgot. Completely.
Yeah, I just to mention that in some cases, the political imagination is not about creating new possibilities, but reminding ourselves of old possibilities that were erased. It's also... Okay.
And also creating a lineage. So connecting ourselves to our ancestors, to people that, you know, we are not the first ones who are thinking today about a binational state. There is a history of this line of thought. There is a history of people who were refusing to take part in the war, to take part in the... So we are not the first ones. Knowing that we have a lineage, that we have an ancestry of refusal, of activism, of imagining otherwise, it's also very powerful.
I would like to comment something. First, to make a connection to what Michael Gadish mentioned about the irony and the two examples of the artworks. And in response to the other examples that you brought up, which one was the metro and the other one was the actualized village or modernized, I think that painfully enough, these two examples also are charged with irony if we just read them in a very superficial way. But it's, I think it's part of the pain of the whole situation, that imagining normality is just read
is avant-garde.
Is avant-garde and like unacceptable to imagine almost. That's for first thing. And also, I think it's not a coincidence. I mean, the two examples of the artworks that you brought are very much from the same family, let's say, or from the same genre. They're both like futuristic. I mean, I see a very strong linkage in these practices. Also, the fact that they were both in the Venice Biennale maybe makes them the presentation, or I mean, a certain level, which is a very closed discourse, and maybe the imaginative part of the political imagination I would like, in a way, to see it more open source and not as a closed narrative to such extent. Like almost like a movie or like a synopsis that is very subscribed to us. On the other hand, the part that you described of the activism, it would be interesting for me to see examples where it's more of artivism, like there is more art in them, because I see these actions as real protest and actions that are really from inside and for a need to react. That bring together the impossible by bringing people together to say something and to come forward. But I would take the extreme side of these closed artworks to these very intuitional and more open-ended actions, and like to maybe to diffuse a bit the borders between the two. That's my.
Well, that's what I am trying to do while bringing them together, hoping that they will, they are indeed, they are operating in very different worlds, right? But I think that we can, when we look at them together as part of what we need in order to imagine, we need both. We need the raw activism, but also we need images that will be will help us to think, and images that are well done, they do help us to think. So I think that we need both the artists and the activists. And I must say that, many of both artists are also activists in a sense. Like Bartana, one of her works, she was shooting in with the Avad Neged Harisot Batim, how do you say it?
The committee for defending
against the house demolitions. So she was shooting with them a film that is called Summer Camp, in which is just position the work of the activists reconstructing Palestinian houses with a Zionist film called Avodah, which is a propaganda film, but she used the same iconography of the Zionist film to bring up this new way of working together to reconstruct what was destroyed. So, and also Sansur, her, if you look at what she does, where she appears, where she speaks, and the way they are both artists that, yes, they were both in the Venice Biennale, but they are also very active in their communities. So, it's important, I think, to have both.
Thank you. There's another question.
Yeah. Hi, Norma. Thanks for the speech. I was having the perception that more and more these activists, movements are a sort of resistance, are a sort of dissidents, and they are a minority in the actual situation. And my question is, we talk about imagination, political imagination. How do you imagine politically Israel in 5 years? I mean, do you think that some people say that what's going on now is the truth, maybe bring something better, or it's just a stop of the game and it's continue the same way? So it's difficult to understand it, but just if you have a vision for 5 years using this imagination tool.
Well, I must say that I feel very, I cannot imagine. This is part of what, I am also part of this crisis of the imagination. Because right now it's very difficult for me to imagine a future here. Really, very, very difficult. So I am completely in the crisis.
In 20 years? Not 5, 20.
In 20 years.
It's more easy. It's more easy. If you think in 20 years in the future, 5 years is tomorrow. But 20 years, maybe one generation, no? For the
I
next
think that,
generation, no?
when the days that I want to be, I have two kids, so I have to be optimist. I try to be optimist. So I try to remind myself that people change very quickly. That, for example, people stopped, like, for example, when I was young, I remember everybody was smoking everywhere, right? Smoking everywhere, all the time, every place. And a few years now, nobody's smoking. Even if I go out with a cigarette, I feel like I'm doing something wrong, right? You're not allowed to smoke anymore. So something changed, and it's a big change. A lot of people changed and suddenly stopped smoking, and smoking became something that people do not do anymore. And so I want to think about this, or think about technology. When I didn't have a cell phone when I was growing up. I didn't know where my mom was. I didn't know where, I just had to come home and use the phone. So we know that we are living through very radical changes if we think about smoking, technology, even the climate. And we adapt and we change. So when I want to be optimistic, I think that, okay, we change, people change very quickly, and we can change also here. Israelis can change, and we can live differently with Palestinians. But other times when I see violence, and after, reading a lot of Arendt, I know that violence is something that once you start using it, you cannot stop. You always need more violence, because in order to stop violence, you need to change the system, right? If you want to keep the system going with violence, you always will need more violence. And then I'm thinking that maybe I will come and visit you in Barcelona.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
Sería genial. Yo quisiera, quisiese decir algo, sí. Gracias, Norma, por abrirnos también, como, ¿sabes?, sintetizar claramente lo que para muchos de nosotros, los que estamos acá en la diáspora y que somos judíos comprometidos y que hemos estado no desde el 7 de octubre, sino de muchos años antes, trabajando por una pacificación. Pero claro, sentimos que en este momento estamos atrapados entre un pasado que no se desaprende, porque si bien muchos activistas, muchos movimientos trabajaron en ese sentido a nivel educacional, en escuelas, hay grupos, etcétera, a partir del 7 de octubre el tema de desaprender el pasado creo que quedó absolutamente clausurado. Y no solamente en Israel, sino que a nivel de la diáspora o a nivel de lo que sucede acá, también el pasado no es un lugar que debamos revisar desde aprender desde otro lugar. Y luego, claro, está el tema de la imaginación. ¿Qué hacemos con este presente y este futuro? Este futuro que, como tú dijiste, es súper difícil de imaginar. Entonces me gustaría que te refirieras específicamente al desaprender el pasado, porque creo que ese es el primer paso que debiéramos hacer para realmente abrir. Eso, gracias.
Yes, thank you so much. It's such an important question, observation. Yes, I think that also imagining, and learning the past, you don't need anyone. You can start today by yourself. And I think that this is something that I learned from Sochrot, for example. When we started Sochrot, I didn't know anything about the Nakba. I have no idea. And so we started learning, like unlearning Zionism, right? Because I am a product of Zionism. And this is something that just by asking questions and starting to ask Palestinians, refugees, tell us your story, things that were not written. They were not written. Even Ilan Pape started writing, in the 90s. So I think that unlearning is something so important. Just by starting asking questions, it opens up really all the possibilities, not only the histories that were silenced, but also the possibilities that were not taken, the roads not taken. So, and we don't need to wait, in a sense. We don't need to wait for the peace, or don't need to wait for tomorrow. We just start, doing it by ourselves. Yeah. So I think it's a very important step, and it's a crucial step. Without unlearning, we cannot imagine.
Other questions, remarks, comments?
Tal quiere.
Thank you, Norma. So I'd like to ask a question that maybe is a follow-up to Margot. If you would like to start unlearning today, maybe what are 2 books or 2 people that you think we should be reading now that can help us unlearn even this evening?
Thank you, Tal. It's an important question. What to read? Where to start? So, of course, if we want to start thinking about this Palestine, so I really recommend Ilan Pape, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, but also Ariela Aisha Azulay. She wrote several books, From Palestine to Israel, for example. It's a small book. Civil Imagination is also another book that I would recommend. And always Arendt, just training the imagination with Arendt. She wrote about totalitarianism. She asked the questions that we should ask again today. What is totalitarianism? And how we live in dark times.
So for some of our participants here, I think it's an important encounter with the Israeli left. Okay? It's, when you mentioned also Ariela Azulay, she was also our teacher, and Adi Ophir, who works with her. So this is the Israeli, and Ilan Pepe, and so on. But sometimes you can see these ideas are linking to the mainstream. For example, there is this movie of 48, Remember and Forget, like an Israeli film that presents the 2 narratives, the Israeli and the Palestinian narratives of the 48 wars, through documents and personal testimonials. And this is a film was commissioned by the public Israeli broadcast. Then it was blocked by the government, and now it is released. And I think this is also an interesting opportunity to see. And I also recall, if you think about artistic interventions, also they have also a tradition. For example, in the 70s, when conceptual art was very much developed in Israel, we have the Messer Metzer, the group of artists, Micha, they were digging the Tzivi Geva and also Micha Ullman, exchanging earth between the kibbutz and the Arab village. And so this is a fascinating time to remember and to bring into practice today. So if we don't have any comments or questions, we'll say thank you very much.
I just want to say that there is a new film that is called Lod, that you may want to look at. It's a film by Rami Younes and Sarah Friedlander, in which they combine testimonies of the Nakba of Lod with animation. In the film, they kind of recreate what Lod could be like if there was no Nakba. And it's done with animation. It's a really It's a great film. It was, of course, banned in Israel, but if you will get in touch with Rami, I'm sure he will send you the link.
So we'll just say that optimism, we can consider it as a merit, but we can see it also as an ethical obligation. No? So in that sense, in 20 years, I believe we'll be beyond this conflict and there will be peace because there's no other options. No? And there's a lot to be done. So thank you very much again, Norma.
Thank you.
For being here with us. And we'll continue with this discourse. Thank you, everybody. And until the next time.
Bye.
La próxima.